The battlefield was quiet in the way only ruin could be. Smoke rolled in dark ribbons across the horizon, broken towers leaned like dying giants, and the acrid scent of burned metal clung to the air. Somewhere within that silence, a faint groan broke through the stillness, the sound of a warrior who had once commanded fear across entire sectors. She lay pinned in the rubble, her armor shattered, her weapon lost. Her legs were gone, torn away in the final exchange that had turned victory into slaughter. Kalira had been a champion, the kind who inspired chants before battle. Her name alone had sent rivals into panic. Yet now her people's voices were gone, replaced only by the ringing in her ears and the deep ache that spread through every fiber of her body. She clawed at the broken ground, dragging herself inch by inch, the fire in her chest burning hotter than the flames that raged around her. She heard them, her own kin. Their voices were distant but sharp enough to pierce her haze. "She's finished. Dead weight. We cannot carry her." Each word stabbed deeper than her wounds. She tried to raise her voice, to command them, but only a hoarse cry escaped her throat. The sound of retreating boots faded until she was left alone, swallowed by silence. It was not death she feared. Warriors of her kind did not beg the cosmos for mercy. What made her chest tighten and her eyes sting was the knowledge that they had turned their backs, not on her body but on her worth. A broken warrior, abandoned like discarded armor. Then came another sound, faint at first, growing steadily louder, a human stride, uneven but unrelenting. She turned her head and saw him through the haze, a lone marine moving through smoke and ruin. His armor was scarred, his helmet cracked, yet his eyes were sharp, burning with the same refusal to quit that had kept humanity alive through every war. Still breathing. His voice cut through the stillness. She bared her teeth, forcing a growl. "Leave me. I am finished." He crouched beside her, ignoring the blood smeared across his face. "Funny. I didn't ask for your permission." With a grunt, he wedged his arms under her shoulders. Pain ripped through her, and she snarled, striking at him with what little strength she had left. "I will not be pitied by a human." He didn't flinch. "Good. Because I don't pity you. I fight beside those who are alive, and you're still breathing. That's all that matters." Her claws scraped weakly against his armor. She could feel his muscles strain as he pulled her free from the rubble. He was bleeding, limping, every movement heavy with exhaustion, yet he moved as though carrying her was inevitable. She wanted to scream at him, to curse him, but the words tangled with the lump in her throat. "You should be saving yourself," she hissed, her pride clinging desperately to its last defense. "And leave you to die here? Not my style." She turned her face away, ashamed of the wetness stinging her eyes. Warriors did not weep. Warriors did not cling. But when his grip tightened, when his breath came ragged but steady beside her ear, she realized that in his stubbornness there was no judgment, no shame, only resolve. The world around them groaned as structures collapsed. Each step he took seemed to echo louder in her ears, as if the universe itself acknowledged his refusal to abandon her. The ground trembled, sending dust raining over them, but he pressed on, carrying her weight as though it belonged to him. She whispered, more to herself than to him, "They left me." He adjusted his grip, his jaw set in determination. "Then they're fools. Doesn't matter what they think. You're still here." Her breathing grew shallow, every jolt of movement reminding her of her missing limbs. She wanted to hate him, to hate his audacity, but there was no denying the truth in his words. He wasn't saving a broken body. He was refusing to let a life be thrown away. As exhaustion clawed at her, she found her voice trembling. "Why? Why risk yourself for me?" He gave a small, humorless chuckle. "Because I don't fight alongside legs. I fight alongside hearts. And yours is still beating." She closed her eyes, her pride fighting against the warmth that flickered within her chest. The human's words settled deep inside, an ember against the cold void of abandonment. For the first time since the battle ended, she wasn't thinking of her shattered body or the shame of her people. She was thinking of the man whose stubbornness refused to let her go. Every step he took echoed with defiance, a message louder than any war cry: "No one is left behind." And though she would never admit it aloud, a small part of her clung to that truth like a weapon she thought she had lost. Ruins stretched endlessly, each broken tower casting shadows like jagged spears across the wasteland. The human's breath came in ragged bursts, his body trembling under the weight he carried, yet his pace never faltered. Every step was an act of defiance, every stride a silent challenge to the universe that dared call her abandoned. She felt each jolt as his boots struck the cracked earth, pain rippling through the empty space where her legs had been. Pride demanded she snarl, demanded she tear away from him and prove she needed no one. But her body betrayed her, too weak, too broken, too raw to do more than cling unconsciously to the arms that held her steady. "You're going to kill yourself," she muttered, her voice more fragile than she wanted it to be. "Maybe," he answered without slowing, "but I'll take my chances over yours." Her sharp laugh turned bitter halfway out. "You think I'm worth saving?" He glanced down at her, sweat streaking through the grime on his face. "I don't think. I know. If you were worth abandoning, you'd already be dead. But you're still here, and I don't let still here go to waste." The words lingered, twisting inside her chest. Her people had measured worth in victories, scars, kills. Once she was broken, her value vanished. Yet this human, bleeding and limping, spoke as if existence itself was enough reason to fight for. Hours dragged like lifetimes. Hunger gnawed at them both, water ran out, and the air grew heavier with the stench of smoldering wreckage. Twice he stumbled, nearly dropping her, but each time his arms tightened as though he would rather break himself than let her fall. She should have mocked him, called him reckless, weak, foolish. Instead she found herself asking, "Why don't you stop?" "No one would know. No one would care." "I'd know," he said, steady and unshaken. "And that's enough." Silence pressed between them. The wind howled through shattered beams, carrying the distant rumble of enemy patrols. She listened to his heartbeat against her shoulder, steady even as exhaustion pulled at him. That sound unnerved her more than any threat, because it whispered of a kind of strength she had never understood. At nightfall they sheltered beneath the remains of a collapsed transport. The human lowered her carefully, then collapsed beside her, his chest heaving. She studied him in the dim light, his hands blistered from gripping jagged edges of armor, his lips cracked, his body shaking with fatigue. "You're a fool," she whispered. "Probably," he admitted. "Why keep carrying me? I'm slowing you down. You'd move faster alone." He rolled his head toward her, his eyes catching faint glimmers of light. "And end up where? Safe but hollow. Faster isn't better if you're running from who you are." The answer stunned her. Among her people, survival meant sacrifice. Leave the weak, protect the strong, keep the numbers high. Yet here was this lone soldier who had turned logic on its head, treating loyalty as more valuable than speed, treating her broken form as worth every ounce of pain. "You don't even know me," she pressed. He smirked, too tired to laugh. "Don't need to. You bleed, you breathe. You fight to keep going even when everything's gone. That's enough for me." Her throat tightened. She looked away, ashamed of the heat rising in her eyes. No one had ever spoken to her like that, not as a warrior, not as a burden, but as something alive, something worth saving simply because she existed. Hours passed in silence. When she thought he had fallen asleep, her voice slipped out against her will. "I thought strength was what made me valuable. Now I can't even stand. What does that make me?" His reply came quietly, firm as steel. "It makes you someone still here. And that's stronger than most." Her chest ached, not from pain but from the weight of words she didn't know how to carry. She turned them over again and again, each repetition breaking cracks into the walls she had built around her pride. Morning came harsh and cold. They pressed onward, the human once more hauling her across terrain that seemed determined to crush them. Patrols passed close, forcing them to duck into shadows. Twice he shielded her with his body as debris rained down, his back taking blows meant for her. At one point, when his knees buckled and she thought he might collapse, instinct drove her to wrap her arms tighter around him, whispering, "Don't you dare fall. If you fall, I fall." He chuckled, breathless but still moving. "Guess that means I don't have a choice." For the first time since her people abandoned her, she laughed. Not sharp, not bitter, but small and real. Each mile stripped away her scorn. Each step revealed his resolve wasn't pity but conviction. He wasn't carrying her because she was weak. He was carrying her because he refused to let the galaxy decide who lived and who was forgotten. By the time the sun dipped low again, she no longer thought of herself as dead weight. She was part of a march, even if she could not walk it herself. Her pride hadn't vanished. It had changed shape, bending into something new, something forged by his stubbornness. When exhaustion threatened to pull her under once more, she whispered, "You fight harder for me than my own kind ever did." He adjusted his grip and said, without hesitation, "That's because I don't abandon what I stand for. And right now, I stand for you." The words struck deeper than any blade, not because of what they promised, but because of what they demanded of her. For the first time, she wanted to live not to prove herself to her people, not to regain her legs, but because this one human believed she was worth every breath he spent. And in that realization, her heart clenched with something she had never felt before. The terrifying, unshakable truth that she was not alone. The land ahead stretched barren, endless as though the universe itself wanted to break them. Each mile wore deeper into the human's body, his shoulders raw where her armor pressed against him, his breath growing harsher with every step. Yet his grip never loosened. The rhythm of his heartbeat against her side became the one constant she could count on, steady even as everything else crumbled. The sky cracked with the roar of enemy engines sweeping low. Dust blasted around them, rubble shifting. The human dove into cover, curling around her to shield her body as gunfire shredded the ground. Metal shards struck his back, tearing fabric, biting into flesh, yet he never let go. When the noise faded and silence returned, he staggered back to his feet, his knees shaking beneath the weight of both her and his injuries. She stared at him in disbelief. No warrior she had ever known would have kept moving after that. "You're bleeding everywhere," she rasped. He grinned faintly, blood trailing from his lip. "Guess I'll have to walk faster so I don't run out before we get there." The absurdity of his humor, delivered in the face of his own collapse, broke something inside her. For the first time since she had lost her legs, she felt something other than rage or despair. She felt the flicker of hope. But hope quickly soured into dread as his pace slowed further. His strength was failing, and she knew it. The tremor in his arms grew worse, his steps dragging. If he fell now, they both would be lost. "Set me down," she demanded. "You can't carry me any farther." "Not happening." His voice was ragged, but the steel inside it hadn't bent. "You'll die," she pressed, gripping his shoulder. "And then what?" "You'll have saved nothing." He stumbled forward, his teeth clenched against the pain. "Then I'll die knowing I didn't abandon someone who needed me." Her chest tightened until she could hardly breathe. He wasn't saying it to impress her, wasn't boasting or posturing like her kind often did. He meant every word. She bit back the surge of emotion, her voice cracking. "You can't stand forever." "Then I'll crawl," he answered, forcing another step. Her throat burned, her eyes wet. For a moment she wanted to scream at him, to shake him, to demand he stop. But then she realized the truth. His stubbornness was not weakness, it was the raw essence of who he was. Humans didn't measure strength the way her people did. They measured it by refusal to quit, even when quitting made sense. As night fell, exhaustion dragged him to his knees. For a terrifying moment she thought he wouldn't rise again. But she felt his arms shift, felt his muscles strain, and with a groan he forced himself upright once more. Her heart twisted painfully. "Why won't you let go?" she whispered, almost pleading. His answer was hoarse, nearly drowned in his heavy breathing. "Because you don't let go of those you choose to stand with. Not ever." The words pierced deeper than any blade. Her own people had measured loyalty by convenience. But this human, a stranger, had bound himself to her with nothing more than will. When enemy scouts closed in, she knew he couldn't fight with her in his arms. With trembling hands, she grabbed a shard of steel from the wreckage and thrust it forward, striking down one soldier who came too close. The motion nearly broke her, but it proved what she had refused to admit. She still had fight left, even without her legs. The human glanced at her, surprise flickering in his tired eyes. She met his gaze fiercely. "I am not useless." He gave a weary grin. Never thought you were. Together they pushed forward, she fighting from his arms when she could, he carrying her through the chaos. Each encounter drained them further, yet with each one they survived, her resolve grew stronger. For the first time, she did not feel like a burden. She felt like part of something unshakable, something beyond her people's cold definitions of worth. When they collapsed into the hollow of a broken wall, she finally spoke what had burned inside her since the first day. "I was afraid," she admitted, voice trembling. "Afraid that losing my legs meant losing everything I was. Afraid I'd be forgotten as nothing but a broken shell." He rested his head against the stone, breath shallow, eyes half closed. "You're more alive than any of those who left you behind. And I'll remember that, even if no one else does." Her chest shook, tears spilling freely now, not of weakness but of release. She had never allowed anyone to see her cry, never wanted anyone to know her fears. Yet this human had seen her at her lowest and still refused to let go. She whispered, her voice raw, "I cannot stand any more." His eyes met hers, unwavering. "Then I'll stand for both of us." The silence after carried more weight than any oath. It bound them together, not as savior and burden, but as equals walking the same impossible road. When the next day broke, enemies struck again, this time in overwhelming numbers. He fought with everything left in him, staggering, bleeding, refusing to fall. She swung her shard, screaming her fury, proving she was still a warrior even without legs. Together they carved through the chaos, neither surrendering even as the odds stacked higher. And when at last the smoke cleared and they still lived, she knew the truth had changed her forever. Her strength no longer came from the legs she had lost or the victories she had claimed. It came from the stubborn, reckless human who carried her weight without hesitation, who gave her back the will to fight when her people had abandoned her. For the first time since the war began, she believed she was not finished. She was something more. And she would fight not for her empire, not for pride, but for the bond forged in the fire of survival. The horizon shimmered with the faint outline of outpost lights, distant but real. The sight might have broken lesser souls, too far to touch, too fragile to trust. But to the human, it was a promise. To her, it was the first glimpse of belonging since the moment her legs were torn away. His steps dragged, uneven, each one wrung from the last scraps of strength he possessed. His body was battered, his uniform shredded, blood staining every inch of him. Yet he carried her still, his arms firm around her as if letting go would mean surrendering not only her life but his own. Her voice cracked against the silence. "You're going to collapse before we reach it." He gave a faint, tired grin. "Then I'll crawl the rest of the way. We're too close to stop now." She wanted to argue, but her pride had shifted. She no longer spoke as a warrior who needed to prove her strength. She spoke as someone who finally understood what it meant to be fought for, not abandoned. And so she said nothing more, choosing instead to trust him completely. The outpost gates loomed ahead, manned not by her people but by human soldiers. They raised weapons at the sight of movement in the rubble. The human's knees buckled once more, yet he held himself upright with sheer will, raising his voice. "She's with me," he rasped. "She lives because we don't leave our own behind." The words echoed, heavy with the authority of truth. For a moment the guards hesitated, staring at the sight of a broken alien warrior carried by one of their own. Then they lowered their weapons and rushed forward, taking both of them into the safety of the gates. Inside, the human finally collapsed, his arms loosening as medics surged around him. She felt herself lifted away, placed on a stretcher, voices shouting about blood loss, prosthetics, and stabilization. Yet her eyes never left him. Even as his body gave in, even as exhaustion claimed him, his gaze sought hers. "You're safe," he whispered before darkness swallowed him. Those words struck deeper than any vow. No one of her own kind had said them, not when she fought, not when she bled, not when she was cast aside. It took a human, broken and bleeding himself, to make her believe she was worth saving. Days passed in recovery. They fitted her with prosthetic limbs, crude and heavy, but enough to let her stand once more. Each painful step reminded her of what she had lost, but also of what she had gained. For the human had not only carried her body across the wasteland, he had carried her spirit out of despair. When she finally found him again, lying pale but alive in the infirmary, she stood on new legs. He opened his eyes and smirked faintly. "Look at you. Taller than me now." She almost laughed, the sound rough but real. "I walk again because you refused to stop carrying me." He tried to wave it off, but she stepped closer, her voice sharp with conviction. "Do not dismiss it. My people abandoned me when I could no longer fight. You proved me wrong. You proved that strength is not in the legs or the blade, but in the will to stand for another." He met her gaze, weary but steady. "That's just what humans do. We don't measure worth by victories. We measure it by who we refuse to leave behind." The words became an oath etched into her bones. She knew then that she could never return to her people as she once was. She no longer belonged to the cold pride of warriors who cast aside the broken. She belonged to something greater, something fiercer, the stubborn, unyielding will of humanity. When she walked again into the open air, her steps uncertain but determined, the others stared. An alien warrior who should have been discarded now stood upright, her form reshaped by human technology and human loyalty. They whispered about her survival, but she ignored them. Her eyes found only him, the one who had refused to abandon her. In the quiet that followed, she admitted aloud what her pride had long hidden. "I thought I was less when I lost my legs. But you showed me I was more when you carried me. More than I ever was before." His reply was simple, as it always was. "You were never less. You just needed someone stubborn enough to remind you." And with that truth, she understood. Her people might never accept her again, but she no longer needed their acceptance. She had been remade not through steel limbs or battlefield scars, but through the human who refused to let her die forgotten. Her voice grew steady, her gaze unflinching. "Then hear me, human. I will never again measure worth by strength alone. I will fight because you carried me when I could not. And I will stand for others as you stood for me." The vow rang louder than any battle cry, not for empire, not for pride, but for something eternal, the bond forged between two souls who refused to let go. For in that moment, she was no longer abandoned, no longer broken. She was alive, reborn, and unshakably certain of the truth humanity had given her. And though the war would rage on, though empires would rise and fall, one memory would endure across the stars: the sight of a battered human marine carrying a fallen alien warrior through fire and ruin, proving to the galaxy that strength is not in leaving, but in staying.